Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Dani.
How are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Good. What are we chatting about today?
Today, Dani, we are going to talk about what is design thinking.
Interesting. We're up to episode 25, and
Wow.
we've never actually talked about what design thinking is.
When you told me that, I was a bit surprised that we hadn't actually done that. That's a great call out, and I think we discovered in these conversations that we both enjoy and appreciate, and place a lot of value on definitions. So it's kind of funny that we haven't actually defined this thing that we're basing all our conversations on. Should we try and do that?
Yes.
Okay.
So let's start with what is design thinking?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's start with what is design thinking, Dani. You see what I did there? Go on, you start, and I'll yeah.
One of the challenges that I ran into when I started research in the design thinking space is actually there wasn't, and maybe there still isn't, an agreed definition on what design thinking is.
Okay.
What I had to do as part of my PhD work is define the definition.
Okay. That you've got a well-researched and solid definition for us to start with.
The definition has evolved over time, because when I defined what design thinking was for my PhD dissertation, I was in a different space, and I was in a different level of understanding what design thinking is. And then as I kind of took my work into the real world and started using it in organizations, it's transformed and transformed. And then as my knowledge about it increased, my ability to speak about it in a more simplistic way also got better, right?
Awesome.
I'm going to start with, this is a definition. This is kind of more of a formal definition, and I'll read it to you. It's actually from one of my papers. So this is the definition that I defined based on the literature review that I did for my research. So design thinking is an iterative and collaborative process that takes an empathetic approach to problem solving that is particularly effective when the issue at hand requires solutions that are innovative yet practical. Design thinking emphasizes balancing creative thinking with analytical thinking, calls for shifting between generating and evaluating ideas, and encourages confronting uncertainty by testing out potential solutions early in the process to learn what may or may not work.
I think we should have a round of applause there. I don't think I've heard you read that out. In fact, I know that I've not heard you read that out before, but that was one of those paragraphs or definitions I'm kind of nodding along to. It's like, it's definitely ticking a lot of boxes for me around the definition, and it's an in-depth and lengthy definition and description, but I think that's by necessity, and maybe sums up in, as you're reading, I was like, yeah, maybe this is why, let's say, the mythical elevator pitch conversation, or even like at the start of a workshop, for example, where you're trying to really, or even just describing, what do you do? Those barbecue conversations, or even, lunchtime conversations with people at work. What's your job? Well, hold on. Allow me to explain. Your definition, I think, hits so many nails on the head. Well, listening to it almost explains why a less in-depth definition doesn't quite cover it. That's my response to that.
And for context, I had to read 164 cases of research papers and books to come up with that definition.
Yeah.
So it is a very researched.
Yeah, actually researched by your human brain. This is pre large language model, ChatGPT, any of those AIs. So
that is kind of the very comprehensive. This is what it is.
Yeah.
But to go back to your point, like, if I was on an elevator or, at a barbecue, that's a lot to say.
Yeah.
So what I've done over time is kind of have this like minor,
Uh-huh.
a minor definition, and then a more in-depth definition.
Yeah. Okay.
Shorter version of that is
Mm.
I describe design thinking as a human-centered and iterative approach that brings people together to design practical yet innovative solutions by marrying analytical and creative thinking.
Nice. It's definitely shorter, and it's still ticking most of the boxes. I was going to ask you actually, how your original definition had evolved, but you've kind of when you start to answer that question, and yeah, that's a nice short definition. I'm going to ask you to read it again.
The first one,
No, the second one, that you're shorter, you're shortened, your what did you call it? You used the
like my one-liner.
your one liner, yeah,
Design thinking is a human-centered and iterative approach that
yeah.
brings people together to
Yeah.
design practical yet innovative solutions by marrying analytical and creative thinking.
Probably hear me scribbling away taking notes. Yeah, it's like I think one of the ones that I've used. What I really like about that is and this might sound a little bit strange, but it doesn't actually mention design in there. Previous, one of my kind of workshop, if you like, definitions is design thinking is a way for non-designers to use the mindsets, skills toolkit of designers in order to do what you've just described. But I like the fact that but that kind of depends on people listening having an understanding of what designers actually do, not their perception of what designers do.
Mhm.
So I like the fact that your definition doesn't mention that.
And that
Okay.
is also interesting you bring that up because as I
Mm.
was trying to define what design thinking is,
Mm.
I really wanted to be able to define it kind of how do you talk about design thinking without talking about design?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nice. I think you've succeeded. Or for me, I think you've succeeded in that.
Is it useful to you?
Yes, it is. I think certainly it. Um, Yeah, like I said, with the initial definition, it's ticking a lot of boxes, important boxes that we need to bring to life when we're talking about the design thinking. Or you could almost call them, I guess, maybe core principles. So these are the things that, because I think maybe we're going off on a tangent, and one of the pitfalls we can fall into, uh, like a bit. One of the traps we can fall into is trying to define design thinking, by a particular process or a particular set of tools, maybe even a mindsets or versus what your description avoids any of that. It doesn't say you need to empathize with people, then you know
Mhm.
define the problem from their point of view, etc., etc. Is actually describing that maybe the word is principle from a principles or first principles point of view. So and then from I understand human centered. Human centered means or have a perception of it. My definition. Likewise, iterative. I like the fact that you talk about bringing people together and don't use the word collaboration. I also think that highlighting the fact that the solutions that emerge from a design thinking approach um, are practical and innovative. Yeah, I think it's like I say, it's kind of anchored in some of the core principles, and maybe a good test of what something is also like exploring what it's not. If that
Mhm.
makes sense. But I've never been asked to come up with a definition of what design thinking is not. Have you?
Yeah, I actually wrote a blog article some time ago
Okay,
about what design thinking is not.
cool.
So the first thing I talk about is design thinking is not about artistic skills.
Hmm. Hmm.
When I first started trying to bring design thinking into organizations, I would always get, oh, but we're not really the creative types, or
Hmm.
we don't, we're not very artistic, we don't
Hmm.
draw well.
Hmm.
That is something that, so one of the reasons I started to talk about design thinking is it's not about art,
Hmm.
was simply because that was just something that kept coming up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that I used to hear, and the second misconception, design thinking is not about abandoning analytical thinking or structured decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes people think about design as this like fluffy thing that happens over there with those people, those creative, artistic people.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you kind of think back to the episodes that we did on the three lenses of design thinking really calls for both types of thinking, right? We've got to have that generative thinking, that creative thinking that generates the ideas, but then we also have to whittle down those ideas and come up with a practical solution. And then the third one is design thinking is not just a nice to have. And talking about it in terms of, because I think for a long time, design thinking was thought as like, oh, it'll be just this fun thing we do,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll go do the real work.
Mm-hmm.
But but design thinking is the real work, and by engaging in design thinking, you deliver very valuable solutions that really solve problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. And another thing I think it's not, again, this is kind of relating to misperceptions I've encountered, is it's not, I'll say, just a workshop or a sprint. And that's why I like your definition. Doesn't, like I said, doesn't mention any process or particular, way of working or environment or anything. Like you can it brings people together, but we don't prescribe how people are brought together. Another thing, it's not, and this is a little bit of a jump, but it's not a guarantee that you'll solve a problem or find a solution. It's like, because again, I've encountered, I guess, a misperception that it's some sort of magic wand or silver bullet that, you'll bring people together. Great. Yeah, we'll take a human-centered approach. Awesome. We'll iterate. We will combine creative and analytical thinking, and will also generate possibilities and narrow down to kind of realities. But it's still maybe the pitfall that I've seen, the pattern that I've seen emerge is that people see, and maybe I'm thinking in particular about like a workshop or a design sprint. People see it as there's a guarantee that the problem will be solved and the solution will be delivered in a particular time frame. I don't know. What do you think of that? I mean, I believe in design thinking that we can, using the definition you've just described. If we adopt that approach, then we can solve many different problems or identify them and solve them. Maybe it's the time factor I'm thinking of, that, but it's not a guarantee. I suppose it's not a dead cert.
I don't think any approach you take to problem solving
No.
guarantee
Yeah.
to delivering a
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah.
I think that our mental model of how we define solution is no longer appropriate for the context that we exist in today.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is the types of problems that we're trying to solve today don't have a one for one, right? So that meaning that we have this problem, and here is one solution that will fix this one problem. Problems that we are experiencing today are multifactorial. Like there's lots of things coming together to create that problem.
Yeah.
So, and those types of problems are not going to be solved by one solution.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we have to do 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 things to fix that problem. But what we fail to do is we fail to think about solutions as, is it making the problem are we making the situation better? Meaning the problem is minimizing. It may not completely go away, but we've done 3 things where the pain point used to be a 10, but the 3 things we've done have now brought it down to a 7.
Yeah.
So I think that there's that problem. The second problem is that there's such a focus on delivering something that and I see this playing out in organizations all the time, where the focus becomes so much on, okay, we've got to deliver. You often end up delivering a solution very quickly, but that solution doesn't actually fix the problem. It just It just fixes the problem of we've delivered something, tick the box, yay, move
Yeah.
on to the next thing.
Yeah, it fixes somebody's problem somewhere. The problem they had was I promised to deliver something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it solves that problem for that person. Yeah, and actually, as you're talking there, that's why our in your definition, your iterative, the reference to iterative is really important. And again, it's maybe flipping that into a not. So design thinking, taking a design thinking approach is not a, maybe I'll say, once and done effort. We don't just do a 2 week design thinking sprint and implement something and kind of walk away from it. I think it requires a continuous design thinking approach to maybe it's just to overcome that delivery kind of bias.
So, but I think as long as the thing we're measuring is that
Yeah.
things are being delivered,
Hmm.
I don't think problems are ever going to get solved because the metric needs to be, are we minimizing the impact of the problem? Is the thing we're
Yeah.
delivering having impact on the problem,
Yeah.
not that something's been delivered?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. It's a little bit scary that the metric of delivering something is still quite prevalent and seen as important. Okay, well, you've got a great definition. We've talked a little about the kind of counter to the definition of just exploring what it's not.
I think there's another part of this understanding what design thinking is that we need to talk about,
Okay.
which is I always tell people that design thinking is very commonly talked about as a process,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the 5 steps, 3 steps. Everybody's got a process for how to do design thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, design thinking is a process, but it's not just a process.
Yeah.
Design thinking is also a set of tools, and design thinking is also a set of capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Learning the process of design thinking is like the starting point. It's like the 101,
Mm-hmm.
right? But as you want to master this, then you've got to build some proficiency with design thinking tools and really understanding, because there's heaps and heaps of tools that we use in design thinking, but you need to understand like what tool to use in what situations with which people,
Mm-hmm.
because that the tool that you use may yield a different result. And then the third one is design thinking is also a set of capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I, to really build mastery in design thinking, you've got to be focusing on understanding the capabilities and developing the capabilities. Because the more that you build the capability, the better you become at using the process and the tools. And
Yeah, it's like a kind of each of those things feeds into the other and reinforces the other. Yeah, yeah. It's like a self-reinforcing.
Okay, so we've
Yeah,
done
yeah,
what it is, what it's not.
yeah.
We usually talk about why. So why is design thinking important?
Well, why is design thinking important, or why is being clear on on the definition of it important?
I'm of two minds on this.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, I feel like design thinking has been around for so long, people should just know why it's
Mm-hmm.
important.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I know that's not true.
Hmm.
Maybe it's that I've been talking about it for so
Yeah,
long.
yeah.
I feel like everyone should know.
Hmm.
But I also like your take on why is defining what design thinking is important.
Hmm.
So maybe we start with that one.
Yes, let's
So, Peter,
rock paper.
why?
Oh, okay. Well, um, well, how do we talk about this without? Well, maybe it will just be seemingly obvious, but not once we get into why is it important. I think maybe it's because it's either not understood or at all or misunderstood, and I think there's a difference between the two.
Mm,
Um, and especially where we are now with design thinking and the I guess the evolution of design thinking in itself and how it's been used in organizations over the last 10, 15 years. Yeah, the misunderstanding is just as important to redirect as the absence of understanding.
mm.
Yeah, maybe that's why defining it is important, and maybe like people who yeah, maybe the final part of that is like we've got lack of understanding, misunderstanding, and then finally understanding. So people who do understand design thinking, creating a definition will help everybody kind of combat or overcome those first two of misunderstanding or absence of understanding.
That feels like a double loop kind of thing there to me.
Really.
Um,
From me, really.
so I think what you're saying is if we address the misunderstandings about design thinking, then we help people understand what design thinking is.
Yeah, maybe we'll just keep it simple and go, design thinking is either misunderstood or just not even on
Understood.
some understood at all.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Done. Full stop.
Okay.
Over to you.
So why is it important to understand what design thinking is? It's important to understand what design thinking is so that you can be clear about what the types of problems
Hmm.
that design thinking can help and
Mhm.
how it can help.
Yeah, yeah.
I also think that it's actually I think that's it.
That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Like how can it help? Because if you're not
Yeah.
clear about what it is,
Hmm.
then because I think the problem today is that even where people understand what design thinking is,
Hmm.
there's a lack of ability to understand, okay, I get what it is, but how do I apply it to my work?
Hmm.
I'm facing this massive problem with whatever it is.
Hmm.
Attrition, digital transformation, call out a few other things that companies are struggling with.
Hmm.
And I think it's that translation about I understand what design thinking is, but how can it help me? So I think being clear about what design thinking is, and part of that is helping people work out how it can help them.
Yeah, nice. That's a nice yeah, nice making what I was describing as concrete.
Should we talk a little bit about why is it design
Oh,
thinking important?
yeah, yeah. So not the definition, but design thinking itself is important. I think it's important. Yeah, let's do that. It's important because it's not that other approaches might not or other approaches don't consider some of the things you've described in your definition, like innovation or having an iterative approach or being human-centered or bringing people together. But I think design thinking is important in that it's an approach that brings all of that together. And almost kind of delving into each of those parts of the definition. For example, bringing creative and analytical thinking together and making the most of both of those.
Hmm.
Well, fundamentally, that seems to be it's really important. uh, uh, like you were saying, the problems we're facing in organizations, a micro scale or a nano scale, such as how to help our team members have good experiences so that they can provide good experiences to our customers so that we can continue to thrive as an organization, whatever your organization, wherever it is, all the way up to existential problems like how are we going to fix the environment that we're currently destroying. I think it's important to bring types of human thinking together and all human brains together. Yeah, I've not encountered an approach, a different approach, another approach that makes the most of that creative and analytical thing
Hmm.
that humans are capable of doing both.
But we're capable of doing both, and we need both.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
We because I think and this is kind of the arguments, and in our next episode about the past, the future
Mm,
of design thinking, we talk about like fundamentally our educational upbringing has kind of funneled it into you're either a creative person or you're an analytical
yeah, yeah.
person. But if you're hyper developed in one area and not the other,
Mm,
you can't, because problem solving requires both of those sides of the brain.
yeah.
And if you're too analytical, then your chances are you're just going to keep looking back at what's been done before and go, okay,
Mm,
these are the existing options.
mm,
Let's figure out how to analyze them and
mm,
pick something.
mhm,
Whereas if you're a creative person, you're probably going to be looking at, okay, what can we do? What can we do? Generating those ideas.
mm.
But it's not until those two types of thinking come together that you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
In my research work, I describe why design thinking is important as
Mm.
for three things. One is globalization, two
Mm-hmm.
is the pace of technology,
Mm-hmm.
and three is increasingly the savviness of consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Globalization is a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, globalization makes the problems we face so much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
COVID-19, the pandemic, is a great example of that, right? When air travel and global travel wasn't a big thing, it was very easy. You know, you look at things like the influenza pandemic back in the, now
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what center it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but let's just say it wasn't a time when people are hopping on planes and traveling left and right.
Mm-hmm.
It was easier to contain. And it's not just so I think the problems that we face now, or you think about the GFC, the global financial crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our economies are so interconnected that when something happens in one part of the world, it impacts, which requires us to think more holistically, take a more systems perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And design thinking naturally enables that because one of the tenets is bringing people together, bringing skill sets together. The pace of technology is advancing at a pace that the human brain does not advance at. Um, which means that adopting technology, creating technology, figuring out how to implement it to solve problems requires that coming together of different thinking. It requires that experimentation to learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in terms of savvy consumers, people now don't decide what they buy or what services they'll use based on the advertising that companies put out. If I'm looking to travel to London and I want to know where to go eat, I have a whole I have access to people that live there that I can go, hey, I'm going to be here on so and so day. Where should I eat?
Mm-hmm.
What hotel should I stay in?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which means that the experiences that people have directly with your products and services matter because it's no longer about the glossy ads because that's really not going to be what gets people through the door.
Yes, it just won't. And even if it does, then and they won't come back through the door unless the reality matches up with the expectations that have been set.
Yeah.
So I like these globalization, pace of technology, and then the savvy consumer. So this is part of your research. I wonder if, especially that last one, the savvy consumers, have you thought about a kind of broader kind of definition or perspective? Because I think that the savvy consumers one could kind of limit our thinking to design thinking as only applicable to problems that, when we're being consumers that we experience versus I know that we both um, know from our experience that we can use design thinking to solve problems that people experience in any kind of domain of their life, whether they are a team member in a retail store who's trying to help a customer or the user of a health service, and so yeah, I just wondered what is our does that make sense? Like, what's our kind of broader kind of maybe definition of the savvy consumers perspective?
Yeah, and in this context, I don't use the word consumer
Mm-hmm.
as in the commercial sense. I use
Okay.
it more as consumption, right? So as
Yeah.
humans, there are things that we go and buy, which is a
Mm-hmm.
form of consuming, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also things that we access. So,
Mm-hmm.
here in New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
I am a consumer of the national parks,
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, okay.
I am a consumer of healthcare services. I'm a consumer of the transportation service.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm using that word in a broader sense,
Okay.
just commercialism.
Got you. Okay, that totally makes sense then. Yeah, like your examples there. I can think of a few more, but okay, yeah. So globalization, pace of technology, savvy consumers. So if I'm somebody in an organization, whether it's commercial or not commercial, and my goal is to help people in whatever way, then the people I'm trying to help simply by definition, I guess because of globalization and the pace of technology, have access to far more information than they previously did. So expectations for one will be completely different to what they might have been 15, 20 years ago.
And we have options, right? We have way more
Yeah,
options. Like
yeah,
it used to be that your only option was whatever store,
mm,
whatever was available in
mm,
your geographic area
mm,
was all you had access to.
mm,
Today, I can buy things from New Zealand, I can buy things from Australia, I can buy things from the UK, I can buy things from China, and it
mm.
all gets shipped to my front door.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've
So,
talked about what design thinking is,
mhm,
why it's important, and two different facets of why it's important.
mhm,
So we usually talk about the how. So
mhm.
how can design thinking help?
Oh, okay. I thought you said, how do we do design thinking? I was going to say, well, have a listen to our other episodes, listener.
Yeah, so
Like,
this whole podcast is really devoted to how to apply design thinking. So you can
yeah,
listen to any of our episodes
yeah, yeah.
and dive into that.
But
But I
how
think,
can it help?
mm,
Is your question?
mm,
Um, well, I think it's kind of bringing everything together, really, isn't it, that we talked about so far. It can help because design thinking, yeah, unifies or these different elements of the definition in an organization. I think how it can help is bringing together. I like to describe it as a diagonal slice of an organization. So everyone from the people making decisions about what happens or what doesn't happen to the people actually interacting with the consumers in our broader definition. Sometimes those groups of people might be the same. And that's the up and down of the organization, and across the way it can bring everyone together from operations, customer service, technology, marketing, finance, and it helps because it helps everyone both draw upon their own existing skills and experience, but also gives everyone opportunity to, I think, draw upon some of their our innate human skills, capabilities, capacity, yeah, to yeah, make the most of everybody's
it breaks, I think the way I would describe that is it
yeah,
breaks down silos because
yeah,
you're collecting people from different parts of the
yeah,
organization,
yeah, nice,
bringing them together.
yeah,
Which, and then when you do that, it brings together different capabilities and different styles of thinking together, right? Because
yeah,
if you get people from marketing and finance and
yeah,
sales and HR together,
yeah,
it's very multidisciplinary.
yeah,
It, I think it makes problem solving very practical because it gets you on the ground with the problem.
yeah, nice,
Rather than sitting out here in the ivory tower going, oh, I think this is what people will really need, you're
mm,
actually on the ground with the
mm,
people going,
mhm,
what do you actually need? And then
yeah,
figuring out
nice,
how to deliver that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then I think it also enables, like, how it helps is it actually reduces the cost
mm,
of developing
yeah, yeah, nice,
because it encourages experimenting
mhm,
and prototyping and figuring it out as you go so that you're not wasting money building something based on assumptions about what you think
yeah,
people might want and need. So it's based on actual, and then you're not building this big thing and then taking it out. You're building small things, taking it out, learning, and then
yeah,
adding to the bigger thing.
yeah, yeah, nice. Another way to describe that or similar thing that it does is de-risks things. So it's a great way of de-risking anything. And yeah, something else that it helps, the way it helps is it gets people galvanized, I described, and energized around a particular problem.
Yeah.
Again, I've seen there's no substitute for people, like you're saying, going and understanding the problem in the field, if you like, whether that is in a field or around a desk, and then actually observing that and internalizing it themselves to then go, this is what we're actually doing. We are solving this particular problem for this particular person. Becomes far more concrete and, like I say, it becomes almost internalized versus an abstract, item on a Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint deck is the complete polar opposite. So yeah, that's another way that it helps.
So we've done the what, the why, the how.
Hmm.
I think that brings us to our takeaways.
I think it does. Yeah. Takeaways. I'm going to take two this week, if that's right. The first one is what we've just described. It's just a nice reminder of how it can help and those nice succinct points we just made there. And then the other takeaway is, of course, your definition, your short, both your definitions actually, like your long definition and your short definition. So I'll be digging through our podcast transcripts to pull those out and have them. I was going to say up my sleeve. I'm not a tattoo person though, so they'll be on paper rather than on my skin. How about you, Danny? What's your takeaways?
The thing that I'm taking away is I've really had fun, but kind of coming back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to, I think sometimes we get so caught up being in the work that we don't take a step back, which is something that as design thinkers need to be doing.
Yeah.
And maybe thinking more about how do we come back to the basics.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, like what are we doing and why are we doing this? Is a great questions to pause on occasionally from a big perspective. Awesome. Well, thank you, Danny. That's been yeah, a really great conversation again, and yeah, I like digging into these definitions, getting into the basics. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks everyone for listening. Talk to you next time.
Talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. See you, Danny. Take care.
Bye. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.